Hey everyone, welcome to part 1 of my Android Studio Facebook API tutorial series. So the first thing you need to do if you want to start using Facebook APIs for Android Studio is you have to make a Facebook developers account. And to do that, you want to go to developers.facebook.com. So once the site is loaded, you should go to login. And if you don't have a login, what you should do, the first is you need to get a Facebook developers account. You need to actually have a Facebook account so they can link and know who you are. And so if you do not have a Facebook account, you should go to create new account down here. Then under here where it says create new account, just fill in your information and sign up. Now you should go back to Facebook for developers and then you will click up here. For me it says login because I already have an account, but for you it should say get started, and that is how you transfer your Facebook account to a developer account. But for me, I'm just going to log in. Now, once you are logged into Facebook for developers, you can see that I currently have no apps created. What I want to do is for an app that I'm going to be using the Facebook APIs, I'm going to be creating an app so that I can do that. So the first thing we're going to do is click on Create App. And for us, for this course, I'm doing for everything else because I'm going to be using Facebook Login or games and stuff like that, or using Instagram APIs. So we'll click on for everything else. This is the name that is associated with your app ID. So your app ID is used a unique ID to identify your app. You have your contact email. So I will just name my app Practice API. And I do not have a business manager account selected because I do not have one. So then I'm just going to create an app ID. Now you will see that this is the dashboard for the Facebook developers page. And so these are the products that you can add to your applications. You can add in a Facebook login, you can add analytics, you can use a messenger, you can use Instagram and all this. And so I'm going to be going over briefly of each one of these in this course. Now, one of the first things you will see when you've created your account and your app, you should notice that your app will be listed under here. My apps are all the apps that you are using. So for example, Practice API is the app that I've just made. And when you click on it, it should take you to the dashboard, which is seen here. And so one of the first things you should notice is your app ID, which basically is used to identify your app. And you can see that you have in development. And what in development basically means is when you register your application with Facebook, it's in development mode. And development mode allows you to test the Facebook SDKs and the products, so their APIs, such as down here. So you can test their login, you can use their messenger, marketing API, Instagram, and so on. Next thing you should notice is right here you have application rate limit. And what this basically means, it's a rate that defines or limits how many API calls can be made within a specific time period. So for example, if you're trying to get a user's profile image from Facebook, that counts as one API use. And there are equations that are used to determine how many of these API calls you can use until you get throttled. What throttle basically means is that it is deliberate regulation of data transfer rate in a communication system. So it basically means that if a user has exceeded a certain amount of API calls, they will be no longer able to do any more. So for example, once a rate limit is reached, any subsequent requests made by your app will fail, and the API will return an error code until enough time has passed until they can make another API. Another thing to notice here is your API stats. So for example, you can track how many calls you've made, the errors that were thrown, and the average request time, and you can also go into more details for your application rate limit. I won't have anything here because of course I haven't been using it, but this is where you would be able to see more details and learn more about what sets what the limits are for the application rate limit. Now we're going to go explore over here on the left settings. So you have basic and advanced. I'll go over the basic real quick. So in here you can see that we have the app ID and the app secret. So the app ID is basically used to send requests to Facebook for data. So it's used to identify your app. The app secret is used basically to decode the encrypted messages from Facebook so that your sensitive information remains protected. And so display name right here is the name of your application. Namespace over here is what you want to appear at the end of the app's URL. This URL that you will give to Facebook takes you to a Facebook canvas. And so what a Facebook canvas is basically it's a full screen ad, in their own words, a full screen ad experience bringing brands and products to life in mobile. So you can look up examples online, but it's basically just a huge full page advertisement that you can use to advertise your app. It should also be noticed that the namespace cannot contain any uppercase letters or symbols. And of course, it must be filled with a name that hasn't been taken by another app because you can't direct your app to someone else's page. And now app domains are basically the app domain is your domain name. So a domain name for a website that you are using with your app. So it is required for security reasons so that your website cannot send you to a different website unless it is listed in an approved list of your app domains. Now you have your privacy policy URL. And so this is required when you want to switch your app into actual live mode and get it under review. And basically a privacy policy is something that is required by law if you are collecting personal information from people. And this URL that you use must be public and must be available to all users so all the users can see your privacy policy reasons. So it's something Facebook has to ensure user privacy. Next, you have terms of service URL. When terms of service are basically the legal agreements between a service provider and a person who wants to use that service. And so this will be a URL, once again, to your website that goes over your terms of service. Next, of course, is an app icon, which is just an image that will be displayed for your app. Down here, you can do things such as verification status, which you can read more into, and you also have data protection and officer contact information. Another thing I want to show you in Facebook for developers is under roles. So if I go to roles over here, and basically there are different kinds of roles. You have administrators, you have developers, testers, and analytics users, each of which you can read about here in these question marks, but I'll give you a brief overview. So an administrator has complete access to your app. They can test your app, change all the app settings, including adding or removing roles, and deleting the app. So they're basically the boss of the whole process. Next are developers, which is said to have non-destructive access to your app. So they can test your app, view and review app submissions, change most of its settings, but they can't add or remove roles, and they also can't delete the app. Next, we have testers, which can only test the app in development mode. So you can see once you create, of course, your app, it'll be in development mode until you submit it for review and provide a privacy URL where it will be live and up on Facebook. Testers can't access the app settings. It is also listed as the most harmless role, and it should be used for all users who you want to test your app in development mode. Finally, our analytics users, and analytics users can only access the analytics of your app. They cannot access any app settings, and they also cannot test your app while it is in development mode. Next, we're going to go over something I think to be really cool, which are test users. What test users are is what it says here. They're a temporary Facebook account that you can use to test various features of your app. So for example, it already gives you a default user, and you can give them permissions such as logging into your app so you can test the login API that you've added to your application. Also, it should be noted that test users are hidden from real user accounts. So on Facebook, you won't be able to see the name of Open Graph test user, for example, if you search it on Facebook. So let me show you an example right here. Is, for example, I can add a user. Number of test users to create, just create one. Authorize test users for this app. Let me click yes, and then you can do things such as login permissions. And so something I could do is, for example, I would like to, if I'm using an Instagram API, I could give them Instagram Basic, which basically allows your app to read an Instagram profile's information and metadata. So if I wanted to do that, and then I create the test user, now you can see it has created someone with a very interesting name, but you can also edit them. You can change password and things like that, and then you can use this email to sign up for your app and use it as for testing purposes. Next, I just want to go over alerts, which are basically just messages from Facebook sending you information about your app, and you can also archive certain messages and things like that. Now let's go over app review. And so what app review is basically the process to request permissions or features for your app or integration. For example, there are some things in Facebook that need to be reviewed before you can use them. For example, a user's posts. By default, you can use things, I believe, their public profile picture and their email or first name, but you have to, for things such as posts, their status, their videos, you actually have to submit your app for review before you can obtain these permissions. App review can also list the current permissions that you already have. So here you can see this is where you would request permissions or features. So for example, let's say you want to use your user's photos, you will have to request for use of this. And user location, for some stuff like that, you'll also hometown, just private things like that, you have to actually request access. And over here, you can see the permissions and features that you already have on the side. So you can see by default, we have the email, which provides their primary email address, and by default, access to the person's name and profile picture. Now, if we go down here to products, this, I believe, takes us, so these are the products that are on the dashboard. So you can see we're on the dashboard again. And you can see you have Facebook login and all these. These are the APIs, of course, that you want to add to your application. And so Facebook login will be the first thing that I'm going over in the next video on how to add login utilities to your Android application. And then furthermore, Up at the top, you see you have support, which is just goes over just if you want to get more support on what you're doing and things like that, or contact Facebook for certain questions you have. You also have tools. So these I will go over real quick. You have a Graph API Explorer, which can basically be used to test the Graph API. So for example, what you would first do is you generate an access token. I want to continue as who I am. I have the Practice API app that I'm using. I'm just going to be using a general user token, and just the permission right now is just public profile. So I believe that was ID, name, and email. So let me see if I can get email. And then what you do is, you have a GET request here, and then you would just click submit. And you can see here's my name and my ID. So this is basically just a way to test out some functionality. Of course, I'll be going over this more when I am actually showing you how to use these APIs, but for now it's just a general overview. And let me just show what it would be like so you can see that email, we have it checked, but we weren't allowed to use it. And that's because we have to add it as a permission. So if I go to email down here, you can see it's hovered in green. And then I believe, let me just generate a new access token. And it will let me know that it will receive my email address. Press continue. And now if I run this again, you can see that we have the email listed as well. And for more support, of course, up here you can just go to documents. And these are all the documents that you can read to learn about the certain APIs and just more information about Facebook for developers. Now what's interesting is you can see, because I was using that Graph API tool, you can see that I've reached my 3% of my limit because I ran three API calls. Okay, so that was all for this video. Next, I'll be going over how to add Facebook login to your application. Thanks for watching.